What's up, anime fans? Welcome back to the channel, Nothing But Anime. I'm so hyped to have you all here, because today we're kicking off an incredible new series. This is part 1 of What If Deku Had the Powerful Weapon Quirk? A theory that's going to completely blow your mind. Before we dive into the action, do me a huge favor. If you're loving the content, smash that like button and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of the epic anime theories we've got coming your way. Alright, enough talk. Let's get into it. Izuku sighed, dropping his backpack on the floor of his bedroom and flopping face first onto his bed. For once, the All Might blanket did little to comfort him, the pain from the burn on his shoulder taking up most of his attention. All I did was say I wanted to be a hero. Kaken, why? He heard footsteps in the hallway outside, and he quickly adjusted himself so that he was sitting upright. Mom stuck her head in, a soft smile on her face. Hi, sweetie. How was your first day of junior high? Izuku smiled, barely holding back a wince as the burn throbbed again. It was great, Mom. The teachers were nice today, and I got to know a lot of people that didn't go to the elementary school. Technically, it was true. The teachers were nice, up until they found out that he was Quirkless. He did get to know new people by getting acquainted with their fists and shoes. Izuku could never outright lie to his mom, but he'd gotten better at leaving out key details. Mom's smile widened. Well, to celebrate a new part of your life, I went ahead and got you something. Her arms came out from behind her back, holding what looked like a gray box. I know you'd always wanted a gaming system of your own. It's an old system from the pre-Quirk era, a Nintendo Switch. Izuku's eyes watered. Mom, you didn't have to. Honestly, you don't need to waste money on me like this. Mom frowned slightly. Izuku, there's absolutely nothing wrong with a mother getting her child a gift. And besides, I didn't buy it. I found it in our storage unit. Izuku smiled. Well, if you say so. After doing his homework, which had been assigned to him on the first day, because things are only going to be tougher for him later in life, Izuku connected the Switch to the TV in the living room. Apparently, this was a used system because there was already a profile set up on it, as well as several games installed on it. Whoever had previously owned it had apparently made sure to keep the card slot empty, but hadn't bothered removing the digital downloads. Izuku went ahead and set up a new profile for himself, deleted the old profile, deleted the old Miis, and made a new Mii for himself. Glancing at the clock, Izuku figured he had about 2 hours or so before dinner. Scrolling through the various titles, he eventually settled on one that he recognized: Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Supposedly, the game had been really popular when it first came out, though game production had gone stale when Quirks developed soon after. The franchise had been known for its low difficulty, and Izuku figured that would be the only game a stupid Deku could be any good at. Before he could start doubting himself any further, he started up the game. The opening cutscene started playing, and Izuku settled in for a short play session. Inko glanced over towards the living room, giggling to herself as she watched Izuku lean forward, focusing entirely on the gorilla boss he was fighting. Initially, she'd felt bad about lying to him, but he looked so happy that she couldn't bring herself to interrupt. The system had actually been kept inside her bedroom, and she would occasionally play some of the titles on it when she was feeling especially down. She'd deleted her old profile and Mii to make it seem like an old system that Izuku could think of as his own, rather than being on loan from her. She turned back to the stove, humming contentedly as the pork cutlets simmered in the pan. Maybe cooking Izuku's favorite food and giving him a gaming system might have been too much for a single day, but it was the start of a new chapter in his life, after all. That, and she knew he wasn't being entirely honest about school. Oh, he thought he was hiding it, but a mother always knew when her child was in pain. She could tell from the moment he had walked in the door that he was nursing some kind of injury on his shoulder, and the bathroom sink running for much longer than to just wash his hands practically confirmed it. Probably a burn, if the light scent of smoking flesh was any indication. Inko sighed to herself. I know Izuku always insists that he and Katsuki are friends, but I can't lie to myself much longer. Mitsuki always had anger issues, and Lord knows what influence the schools are having on that boy. I should have pushed harder after that one incident in elementary when Izuku got hurt while playing with that Tsubasa boy. She shook her head, clearing her mind of the negative thoughts. No, all I can do now is support him. She turned her attention back to the pork cutlets, humming along with the music coming from the living room. She didn't bother turning around to check on Izuku, believing that he was mature enough to know when to stop. Though, if she had turned around, she would have noticed his hair glowing. She would have noticed a distinct green cap appear over his green curls, going unnoticed as the two occupants of the apartment were too focused on their own tasks. She would have noticed the sword laying on the floor behind the couch. Izuku blinked as he felt a tap on his shoulder, glancing up at where Mom was standing to his side. Time for dinner, sweetie. He blinked again, before glancing over at the clock, eyes widening at how quickly the time had gone by. Ha, okay, Mom. He quickly went through the process of closing down the game and turning off the console and TV. By the time he was done washing his hands, Mom had already set out 2 plates of katsudon on the table. He started digging in immediately. I had no idea playing video games made you this hungry. And it was only for 2 hours. Mom giggled. You liked that game, didn't you? I wasn't expecting to have to get you to stop myself. Izuku hummed, putting his chopsticks down on the table. Me either. I've seen people play video games on HeroTube before, but I got distracted, sucked in almost. It's weird. And I don't think I'm supposed to be this hungry after only 2 hours. Mom frowned. You're feeling hungry? You told me you had a good-sized lunch at school today. Unthinkingly, Izuku cringed at the thought of school. Sure, he'd gotten a good-sized lunch, up until the moment the tray was knocked out of his hands and the food was spilled all over the cafeteria floor. He could still hear the jeers of Kakin and his 2 lackeys. Mom sighed. Izuku, sweetie, you don't have to lie to me. Are you safe at school? Izuku waved his arms frantically. No, Mom, I'm fine. Besides, even if I did have any problems, which I don't, then they'll probably go away once I get to know my classmates better. Mom hummed, and for a split second, Izuku thought she didn't believe him. But then she sighed and smiled at him. Well, if you're sure. Still, I think we should see a doctor. It's odd that you're feeling so hungry after only 2 hours of playing. If it keeps happening, I'll call Mizurufu General Hospital and set up an appointment as soon as they're available. The quirk specialist frowned, looking up from the laptop she'd carried into the examination room. Ha! You've clearly got an active quirk factor in your hair, though it looks closer to that of a 4-year-old's quirk factor than someone your age, like it was only awakened recently. It's a common sign in late bloomers or people with obscure activation requirements. It seems to be connected to the optical center of your brain. Have you seen anything strange or new in the past few weeks? Izuku hummed. Well, Mom bought me a new gaming system to celebrate my first day of middle school. I've been playing it for about half an hour each day so far, though I did play on it for 2 hours on the first day before dinner. Why? The woman hummed, scrolling through the results on her screen. Interesting. You seem to have an extra lobe connected to your occipital lobe. This lobe is commonly found in people with stockpiling quirks like fat gum. If you'd like, I can arrange for you to meet with a colleague of mine tomorrow. She's a quirk counselor whose quirk allows her to analyze the quirks of other people through skin contact. Normally, she's got a pretty steep fee, but she's got a soft spot for people that had their quirks misdiagnosed. Would you like that? Izuku nodded. If I actually have a quirk, I'd really like to know that. The specialist winced. Dr. Tsubasa diagnosed you as quirkless, right? Can't imagine you've had it very well. I lucked out, getting a quirk that lets me scan a person's body like an MRI. My little sister is quirkless, and she had to put up with a lot of bullies in school. Can't imagine it's gotten much better for your generation. Inko hummed as she and Izuku sat in the waiting room for the quirk counselor. As expected, the woman had been more than happy to give them a discount after hearing about Izuku's misdiagnosis. Apparently, her quirk had put her services in high demand, and the waiting list was usually quite long. But Izuku had gotten an appointment for the day after his hospital visit. She glanced over at him, his attention distracted by the other people sitting in the waiting room. His fingers were twitching, obviously wanting to write down quirk analyses in one of his notebooks, which reminded her, the other day, he'd come with a tattered notebook, as though it had been ripped apart and hastily taped back together. She sighed. Izuku. Her son immediately turned to her, confusion evident in his expression. Be honest with me. Your classmates aren't kind to you, are they? He started stammering, clearly nervous at being put on the spot. Eventually, he managed to squeak out. They're fine. They just... Inko frowned and took his face in her hands, immediately cutting him off. Izuku, you don't have to hide anything from me. I'm your mother. It's my job to worry about you. You don't have to hide your pain to make me feel better. Izuku fell silent. Eventually, he whispered, They don't like that I'm quirkless. I was analyzing the quirk of the girl in front of me the other day, and Yubi stretched his fingers to take my notebook and rip it in half. Inko sighed and pulled Izuku into a hug, rubbing his head softly. It didn't take long before he started crying silently, letting the tears flow as he melted in her embrace. Fortunately, they managed to collect themselves just as the receptionist looked up from her computer and called out, Midoriya Izuku? Mawakaru-san will see you now. Izuku glanced around the room as they entered, noticing the one chair set right in front of the desk and the other chair set to the right and slightly behind the first chair. His attention was drawn to the woman behind the desk, who glanced up from her computer and smiled. Midoriya-san. Midoriya-kun, please, sit. They complied, with Izuku sitting in the chair set closer to the desk. He asked, Mawakaru Mamoto, right? Gaza-san at the hospital said that you can tell what a person's quirk is by touching them. The woman nodded, the smile never leaving her face. That's correct. My quirk, Analyze, allows me to know the basics of a person's quirk by making contact with their skin with 5 fingers. I'm sure you noticed how close that chair is to my desk. It's set up that way so that I can easily reach across and make contact with someone without having to sit right next to them. In any case, I'm sure you're curious as to your own quirk status. Mom nodded. Gaza-san implied that his previous diagnosis might not be accurate, since the doctor that gave it has a history of being wrong. Izuku was originally diagnosed as quirkless, but he's been experiencing strange things recently, and we wanted to be sure. Mawakaru-san winced. That's rough. I know what people are forced to put up with based on a lack of a quirk. Heck, before I first analyzed someone, I thought I was quirkless myself. But enough reminiscing. She laid her hand out flat on the table, one eyebrow raised. May I? Izuku nodded, and she reached out, her hand wrapping around Izuku's temple. She closed her eyes, and Izuku watched with fascination as her eyelids were covered in a flowing pattern of blue lines. After a few seconds, the lines disappeared, and Mawakaru-san let go of his head, opening her eyes and steepling her fingers on the desk with a smile. Well, I can confirm that you do indeed have a quirk after all, though it's a bit of a strange one. Apparently, your quirk allows you to store items that you've seen before in a sort of mental inventory, then manifest them at will. The strange part is that, for whatever reason it has to be an item in a video game, it can't be something that you've previously held in your hand. In addition, manifesting the items uses the fat stored in your cells, so the more you eat, the more items you can make. Once it leaves your hand, any manifested item will dissipate after about 3 seconds. The fat won't go back to you when the items disappear, though, it kinda just disperses into the air. Izuku's eyes widened. That explains why I was so hungry after the first day of school. I must have created something without realizing it. Mawakaru-san nodded, rubbing at her chin. My guess is that it must have been something you were using in the game at that time. If you don't mind my asking, what game were you playing? Izuku rubbed at his neck sheepishly. It was an old Nintendo game, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, I think. At one point, I was playing around with the sword ability, and I remember wishing that I could use it myself. Mawakaru-san smiled. That must have been when it happened. Oh, another thing, you can only store so many items, and the number you can manifest at any given time is even more limited. The numbers will grow with time and training, but at the moment, your current limits are 3 inventory spaces and 1 equipped item. Although, objects that are linked to each other will only count as 1 item for your quirk. In the case of Monday, you manifested the hat and the sword as a single item. And with linked objects, you only need to be holding 1 object to keep this set intact. It is possible to only manifest 1 part of a set, but only certain parts can be manifested by themselves. In this case, you could manifest just the sword, but you can't manifest just the hat. Izuku glanced over at Mom, tears streaming down his face. Mom, I have a quirk. I have a quirk. I can be a hero. Mom smiled. I never thought you couldn't be a hero without one, sweetie. But yes, you have a quirk. Mawakaru-san cleared her throat, drawing Izuku's attention. As heartwarming as this is, we do have some paperwork to get out of the way. She turned her computer around, showing Izuku the forms on the screen. I've already filled out most of the information on the quirk registry forms for you, such as type and basic abilities. All that's really left is to name it. Izuku glanced at Mom, and she nodded. Turning to Mawakaru-san, he smiled and said, Save file. Katsuki glanced up as Deku walked in just before the bell rang, scowling at the smile on the nerd's face. Oi, Deku, what's got you so happy, you useless freak? The nerd just smiled even wider. Have a little patience, Kaken. I've got a surprise for you. Katsuki's scowl deepened, but he didn't say anything. The nerd walked past him and sat down in his seat, that smug grin never leaving his face. He'd better not be planning something fucking stupid. The other extras started filing into the room, exchanging confused glances at the grin on Deku's face. After a few minutes, the bell rang right as Teach walked in, doing a double-take at Deku's expression. After going through the morning announcements, Teach finally broke. Midoriya, care to share with the class what's got you in such a good mood? Everyone turned to stare at him, and Deku opened his mouth. Before he could get a word in, Fingers scoffed and said, Bet you his mom finally got a clue and ditched him. Katsuki immediately rounded on him. Shut up. Fingers didn't even look a fucking bit remorseful as he said, What? It's the truth. He's only dragging her down by existing. Suddenly, there was a sword at Fingers' throat. Katsuki heard Deku say, You know, it's not polite to interrupt someone. The classroom went utterly silent. Slowly, Katsuki turned around, eyes widening at the sight of the instantly recognizable hat on the nerd's head. Deku removed the sword from Fingers' neck and laid it on his desk, before leaning back in his chair with a smug grin on his face. As I was going to say before you be so rudely interrupted, I'm in a good mood because my quirk finally came in. There was silence, before the classroom erupted into laughter. Teach chuckled. Good one, Midoriya. Never took you to be the comedic type. The smile faded from Deku's face, and he sat upright. I'm not joking, sir. Why would I joke about having a quirk when I haven't made jokes in the past 8 years? Fingers laughed. Come on, Deku. Everybody knows that if you don't get a quirk when you're 4, you don't get a quirk at all. Katsuki scoffed. Bullshit. Don't you remember science class last year, dumbass? There's plenty of people who get their quirks later than 4 years old. You've got late bloomers where it just shows up late, or people with obscure activation requirements that don't find them until years later. Remember the article about that one kid in Portugal? He didn't realize he had a speed quirk until he ate a pineapple for the first time when he was 10. Deku finding his quirk when he's 12 isn't that far-fetched. Deku nodded. Exactly. In my case, it was because I hadn't played a video game until last week. My quirk? The ability to store items from games I've played and manifest them at will. Teach stopped laughing. Midoriya, stop this prank right now. I don't know where you got your hands on a sword, but trying to pass it off as a quirk is in no way funny. The principal has already seen your diagnosis from when you were 4. Put away the sword and stop terrorizing your classmates. Deku tilted his head, and Katsuki went pale. That was the head tilt Auntie did whenever she was about to verbally rip someone to shreds. Terrorizing, sir? You mean like how my classmates have been terrorizing me ever since I was declared Quirkless? Oh, and for the record, that's a false diagnosis. If you'd bothered to check with the school nurse, sir, you'd have realized that I had an appointment with Miwakaru Mamoto yesterday, and she verified that I do indeed have a quirk. Teach scowled. Enough lying, Midoriya. You and I both know that the esteemed Miwakaru Mamoto would never see a quirkless freak like you. Now put the sword away and apologize to your classmates before I give you detention. Suddenly, the classroom door slammed open. Teach went pale as he recognized the woman who had just walked into the room. Deku's eyes widened. Miwakaru-san, I wasn't expecting to see you here. The woman smiled softly. And I was hoping that I wouldn't have to be here today either, Midoriya-kun. Unfortunately, when I called your school's nurse this morning to confirm she had received my analysis, she told me, and I quote, "Don't worry, I went ahead and tossed out that forged report. I'll see to it that the offending student is properly disciplined." Naturally, I was quite irritated. She turned to the teacher and scowled. Sadly, I see that it isn't just the nurse with a problem. Honestly, accusing one of my patients of lying, just because they were believed to be quirkless? Frankly, sir, you disgust me. Suddenly, the intercoms crackled to life, and the voice that came on over the speakers wasn't one that Katsuki recognized. Attention, students of Aldra Junior High. Due to suspicions of quirk discrimination, this school will be closed for the foreseeable future. Please proceed to the front entrance so that you can be picked up by your parents. Students that live within walking distance of this school are allowed to go home. The classroom devolved into chaos, and Katsuki looked over at Deku, but the nerd looked just as surprised as him. Humming, Katsuki stood up and grabbed his bag, before looking back at the other boy. Meet me outside in a few minutes. We need to talk. Let's see if that spine is a one-time thing or a permanent fixture. Izuku frowned as he walked out of the front entrance of the school, noticing Katsuki standing by himself a few meters away. Walking forward, he crossed his arms and said, "I'm surprised. Where's your posse?" Katsuki scoffed. "Those extras? They tried hanging here, but I told them to shove off. This is just between the two of us." Izuku hummed. "So, is this going to be a talk, like the first day of school? Or are we actually going to talk?" Katsuki scoffed. "Well, you finally stood up for yourself, so I can't be too mad at you." Suddenly, everything clicked. "You're kidding. All of the beatings, all of the insults, all of the burns. And it was because you wanted me to stand up for myself?" Katsuki raised an eyebrow. "Duh, you didn't know that?" "No." The blonde physically leaned back at the sudden shout. "I thought you hated me, Katsuki. I thought you wanted me to give up on being a hero." Katsuki's face paled. "You? Really?" "Yes. You never once made me think that you were being in any way supportive." Katsuki stared at him for a second. "But, I thought it was obvious. I mean, Mom always yells at me to get my ass in gear. That's how you encourage someone, right?" Izuku sighed. "No, your family is a weird outlier that I'm not even going to try and tackle right now. But I had no clue you were trying to get me to stand up for myself. And I thought you were genuinely trying to make me give up on my dream." Katsuki slammed a palm into his face. "Now you tell me. God, I feel like such a dumbass." Izuku snorted. "Now you know what it's like. You want to know why I chose Kirby for my first game? It was because I was convinced that a stupid Deku would only be good at an easy game. You seriously messed up my self-confidence, Katsuki." Katsuki sighed and leaned back against the building, staring up at the clouds passing by overhead. "Fuck, you're right. Can't believe I ever thought you were looking down on me for claiming you'd be a hero. It sounded to me like you were going to try and be a hero without putting in any work, like you could just go out and do the same things as real heroes without any effort. And that thought pissed me off." Izuku chuckled. "Well, you do have a point there." He gestured at his thin frame. "I mean, can you see this scrawny mess going out there and saving people?" Katsuki scoffed. "No way in hell." Izuku smirked. "Yeah." They stood there in silence for a bit. "So," Izuku stuck his hand out. "Want to try being friends again, Katsuki?" The blonde snorted and grabbed Izuku's hand, pulling himself upright from his leaning position. "Sure thing, Izuku." Shoyuta grunted as he watched the two students walk off in the same direction away from the school. "Humph. Guess he's got more potential than I first thought." Mamoto leaned over and stared out the window in the direction of the two kids. "Who, Izuku-kun?" Shoyuta shook his head. "No, the Bakugo brat." Mamoto frowned. "Yeah, Gazu had told me about the still healing burn on the kid's shoulder, and given the research I'd put in before coming here today, I was expecting the brat to just be a hateful jerk. But, turns out he's just a misguided kid who didn't realize his encouragement was coming off as hateful. Who knew?" Shoyuta shrugged, before turning towards her. "So, what did you find on their servers?" She winced. "A lot, and none of it good." She tapped away at the keys on her laptop, bringing up a folder of video clips. She hit a few more keys, uploading the files to a USB. She pulled it out of the laptop and held it out to Shoyuta. "Bring that to the rat god. He's not gonna like what's on it, but it's necessary for the investigation. I went ahead and took out the clips of Bakugo and Midoriya, but everything else is intact." Shoyuta took the USB, stashing it in one of his belt pouches. Dare I ask what's there? Mamoto sighed and leaned back in her chair. Teachers assigning Midoriya extra homework on account of his quirk status, students with weak or villainous quirks being given detention for just being near fights without being part of them, other students beating Midoriya up in the hallways, footage of the students openly using their quirks inside and outside of classes, teachers giving Midoriya detention for coming into class with a destroyed uniform or other minor offenses, students with heroic quirks being given barely a slap on, the wrist for serious offenses, students knocking Midoriya's lunch tray out of his hands. The list goes on. Shoyuta raised an eyebrow. School's only been in session for about a month. How do you have so much footage on Midoriya? She sighed. The teachers take every opportunity they have to make a pariah out of him. And apparently they find several opportunities every day. Not even an hour goes by in the footage before a student pushes Midoriya around or a teacher gives him detention for some arbitrary reason. It turns my stomach just thinking about it. Shoyuta scowled. Mine too. I'm setting Nedzu on these scum as soon as possible. I trust that you and the police can wrap things up here. The woman smirked and threw up a mock salute. Yes, sir, Eraserhead, sir. Don't you worry about a thing, we've got this covered. Shoyuta snorted and lightly ruffled the shorter woman's hair. All right, by the way, Mick's hoping you'll stop by sometime later for dinner. For reasons I can't fathom, he likes to have you around. Mamoto giggled. Go on, cousin. Get that footage to your boss and go back home to your loving husband and 3 cats. Shoyuta rolled his eyes. Actually, I found another stray on patrol the other day. Mom glanced up as Izuku and Katsuki walked into the apartment, her eyes red and puffy from crying. You didn't tell me it was this bad, sweetie. Izuku winced. Sorry, Mom. It's been so long. It's a bad habit to downplay things. I'll try and work on it. She sighed. Well, so long as you're trying to be better. She noticed Katsuki standing back by the door, and her eyes widened. Oh, Katsuki. It's nice to have you over. Katsuki cringed and rubbed at his arm. Probably not as nice as it used to be, but it's my own fault. Mom frowned. Yes, I had my suspicions, but I wasn't willing to act unless Izuku specifically told me that it was a problem. Izuku cringed and rubbed at the back of his neck guiltily. Katsuki sighed and crossed his arms. Honestly, I'd have preferred it if you'd given me a lecture earlier. Turns out the whole thing was a miscommunication on both sides, though mostly on my part. I already apologized like 5 times on the walk over from school, but I'm not expecting to be called Kaken again anytime soon. Mom smiled softly. As long as you know what you did wrong and are working to fix it. Speaking of doing things wrong. She turned to Izuku. I haven't been fully honest with you. The switch that I gave you is actually the one that I got from my father. I thought you would appreciate having something you could call your own, and I didn't want you to think that you were just borrowing it from me. Izuku smiled softly. I don't blame you. Honestly, if you hadn't done that, I probably would have refused to play on it at all, thinking that I'd be taking something from you if I did. Katsuki cleared his throat. Well, if we're good for now, I'm gonna head home. I've still got to explain myself to the hag and the old man. But hey, maybe now you can start playing against someone. Izuku grinned. I think I'd like that. Mom chuckled. Oh, already discounting your mother as a potential player too. I'll have you know, I currently have a streak of 25 wins against Mitsuki in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Actually, I think she still has a few controllers sitting around the house, just in case I decide to invite her over for another session. Goodness, it's been years since the last one. Katsuki snorted. I'll let her know that you're getting back into gaming. Heck, I might even pick it up myself. Train my hand-eye coordination and reflexes and stuff like that. Izuku smiled. I look forward to finally kicking your butt at something. Chapter 3. Katsuki groaned as his Captain Falcon was spiked off stage, the screen declaring Izuku's Pokemon trainer the winner. Dang it, how are you so good already? Izuku smirked. Practice. I've been playing a lot recently, and Mom can't even complain about it because it's technically quirk training. Katsuki rolled his eyes. Sure it does. Wouldn't training involve increasing your storage capacity and the number you can manifest simultaneously? Izuku shrugged. True, and I work on that too, but the increased library gives me a greater number of things that I can put in my inventory. More variety in my items gives me more scenarios where I can be helpful. Like, your quirk is great, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't exactly help in a situation where you have to silently infiltrate a villain's base. Meanwhile, I could use one of Spy's invisibility watches from TF2 to turn invisible and go undetected, while still being able to face villains head-on with different weapons if need be. You see what I'm getting at? Katsuki nodded. Makes sense. Any good hero has more than one trick up their sleeve. And while you're right that my quirk isn't great for stealth, that doesn't mean I can't be good at it. Izuku grinned. I never said you couldn't. Present Mike has a quirk that's great for offense, but he still manages to be able to sneak up on villains from behind without them realizing. Remember that one time he teamed up with Ingenium to take down Earthbreaker? Katsuki grinned. Totally. It was so cool, watching Ingenium run rings around the guy's attacks and draw his attention, only to get his shit rocked from behind by Mike. From the kitchen, Mom barked, Katsuki, language. The blonde winced. Sorry, Auntie. Aunt Mitsuki shook her head from where she was sitting on the couch. It's still weird hearing Katsuki sincerely apologize for things. I mean, it was only a few months ago that he was a total brat. Uncle Masaru patted her on the shoulder. At least it isn't taking him 23 years to learn manners like you did. Aunt Mitsuki gasped. What? Who told you that? Mom giggled, and the blonde woman rounded on her. Inko, I trusted you. Izuku laughed. It had been 5 months since Aldera had been shut down, and both the Midoriya and Bakugo families had already made huge strides in making up with each other. Katsuki was now a constant presence, always challenging Izuku in either academics or video games. Aunt Mitsuki and Uncle Masaru would sometimes come over for larger game nights and the occasional Smash Ultimate tournament, but most often they would chat with Mom while the two boys played together in the living room. At first, Mom had looked into other junior highs in the area, but as it turned out, being a month into the school year meant that most of their classes had been filled up either by students who had enrolled at the start of the year or former Aldera students who had transferred as soon as the junior high had shut down. As a result, both Izuku and Katsuki started attending an online school. Aunt Mitsuki went ahead and bought each of them a new laptop, brushing Mom off when she complained about the cost and pointing out that she and Uncle Masaru already made more than enough from their shared clothing line, not to mention whenever she modeled for other clothing lines. Katsuki had always been at the top of his class, and that hadn't changed. But Izuku, he was absolutely thriving. Without the pressure to intentionally lower his grades so he wouldn't be accused of cheating, and the freedom to work at his own pace, Izuku was soaring through the curriculum. Sure, he slowed down so that he wouldn't leave Katsuki in the dust, but that didn't stop him from breezing through the assignments and getting 100s all across the board. Katsuki still called him a nerd, but at least now it was teasing rather than insulting. Well, technically goading, but still. Katsuki still had a few outbursts every now and then, but at least he wasn't causing property damage or injuries as often. Besides, most of those outbursts were when Katsuki tried hanging out with former classmates from Aldera, only to find out that they were doing things like underage drinking or putting someone in their place. At one point, he'd found Yubi and Genki with a kid named Mineta, cornering a girl in an alleyway and making grabbing motions towards her skirt. Those three had ended up in the hospital, and the girl, who was named Hagakure, gave Katsuki her number. That wasn't to say they never went out. For as much as Izuku had picked up gaming as a serious hobby, Mom still made sure that he went outside for fresh air and exercise often. There was a gym nearby that allowed repeat customers to sign out rooms for Quirk training, and apparently Katsuki had been going there for the past couple years. And with their friendship firmly re-established, it wasn't long before Izuku became a regular there, too. Over the past 5 months, Izuku had bulked up nicely. He could bench press up to 70 kilos and reach a running speed of about 8 meters per second, maybe 8.5 if he was pushing himself. Not bad for a kid whose limits 5 months ago had been 20 kilos and 3 meters per second, in his opinion. Of course, he'd also made progress with save file. He'd worked his way up to 8 inventory slots and 3 items manifested at the same time. It seemed like slow progress, but the employees at the gym assured him that it would speed up as he kept working at it like with normal exercise. He'd also found that things that pushed the boundaries of physics took up more slots in his quirk. For instance, the sword ability only took up 1 slot, whereas a hyper potion from Pokemon took up a whole 3, and he couldn't manifest any other items until the bottle used up its manifestation time and dissipated. Though it wasn't all weights and quirk training, Katsuki made sure to get it through Izuku's head that breaks were important. 2. In the blonde's words, there's no point in putting all your energy into training when you don't give yourself time to get that energy back, or else you're just going to lose steam and waste all that progress. Most breaks were spent playing video games, of course. For as much as they helped with reflexes, hand-eye coordination, and critical thinking with the occasional puzzle game, they were still fun time wasters. On some break days, Izuku often found himself booting up Animal Crossing, New Horizons, and just experiencing the simple pleasures of pre-Quirk life. Naturally, with the number of online games out there, Izuku had far more friends than just Katsuki, though most of them he only knew through his games. And there were quite a few of them. Insomnicat was a constantly tired ball of snark who had very heavy opinions on quirk discrimination and heroics. Baby Gremlin was a fast-talking genius who was incredible at spotting minor details and taking in lots of information at once, making her the default scout/sniper. Newton Esbane was bubbly, friendly, and always up for co-op games, especially ones with support roles. Snow_White was a quiet companion, always filling the role of healer and being a calming presence, but only over text, never voice chat. Sparky_Way was a comedian who usually had a short attention span, but had incredible focus when it came to gaming, and had probably the best aim out of the entire friend group. Rock_Riot was an enthusiastic player with a penchant for tank roles, and always called things manly for some reason. Mr_Wister was similarly enthusiastic, always going on about heroic passion and whatnot. Totally_Jacked, meanwhile, was almost as snarky as Insomnicat, but had a cuter side that always came out when talking about music. The first meetings had been just as varied as their personalities. Izuku had met Insomnicat through an online forum for talking about underground heroes, and the two had bonded quickly over their shared appreciation for an obscure hero called Eraserhead and their mutual love of RPGs. Baby Gremlin had joined a Call of Duty lobby at the same time as Izuku, and the two had hit it off quickly, their different play styles somehow complementing each other perfectly. He'd met Newton Esbane in a game of Overwatch, when her Pharah had appeared out of nowhere and blasted his Genji off a cliff. Snow_White had joined him in Team Fortress 2, supporting Izuku's soldier with his medic. Katsuki had met Sparky_Way in the same Overwatch lobby as Izuku and Newton Esbane. Katsuki had been angry when his Junkrat suddenly collapsed, only to turn completely into respect when the kill feed showed the cross-map headshot from the other player's Widowmaker. Rock_Riot and Katsuki had ended up on the blue team opposite Izuku and Snow_White on red, and the combination of Heavy and Demoman respectively had proved a formidable force. Mr_Twister had been paired against Katsuki in an online Smash Ultimate tournament, and the two had hit it off when the former's Incineroar just barely lost to the latter's Donkey Kong. Katsuki had met Totally_Jacked in a different Overwatch lobby, when her Lucio saved him from an enemy Reinhardt. After a few weeks of interacting with their online friends via texts, phone calls, and in-game chats, Izuku and Katsuki decided to put together a Discord server for all of them. Named Hero Hopefuls, there were a few major channels for general discussions, memes, cat pictures, frequented by Insomnicat, hero-related discussions, and of course various voice channels with designated text channels for gaming. They hadn't gotten to the point of using their real names yet, but they knew quite a bit about their friends. Insomnicat was in the foster system, and kept bouncing around because of his villainous quirk. Baby Gremlin lived in Kyoto and loved to tinker with support gear, often talking with Izuku in private messages or the general chat about quirk analysis. Newton Spain lived in Mie, and her family was pretty strapped for cash, with her just barely being able to afford a decent laptop for games and Discord. Snow_White didn't like talking out loud because of his quirk, but he loved to gush about animals in the text channels. Sparky_Way would talk about basically anything, and would switch topics on a dime. Rock_Riot loved anything remotely related to Crimson Riot, though he seemed a little annoyed that his quirk wasn't flashy enough for a pro. Mr_Twister lived in Yamanashi, and was considering both UA and Shiketsu for their heroics courses. Totally_Jack's parents ran a music store in Shizuoka, and both Izuku and Katsuki promised to check it out at some point. Izuku was jolted back to the present by the music of the character select screen, and he quickly picked his controller up off the side table by the couch, eyes scanning the screen as he debated who to pick next. Hitoshi quietly closed the door and swept through the house without making a sound, quickly making it to his room, in the attic and closing the door, breathing a sigh of relief as he flopped onto his bed. God, I can't wait until I get into UA and apply to live in the on-campus dorms. He got up and moved over to his desk, pulling out his laptop and opening up Discord. He quickly put in his login information and maneuvered to the Hero Hopeful server, noticing that Bush_Boss and King_Explosion were currently playing Smash Ultimate. Hashtag General. Insomnicat. Sup, fuckers? 3:47 p.m. Newton Spain. Oh, hi Cat. 3:47 p.m. Bush_Boss. Cat, can you please not? Mom would kill me if she found out that the people on my Discord server used that kind of language. 3:48 p.m. Bush_Queen. Are you sure about that? 3:48 p.m. Bush_Boss. Mom. 3:48 p.m. Bush_Boss. When did you join the server? King_Explosion. I added her about a week ago. Nerd. 3:48 p.m. Bush_Boss. Why? 3:48 p.m. Bush_Queen. Well, I wanted to meet the people you always gush about at dinner. 3:49 p.m. Bush_Queen. Besides, always beating at King_Explosion's mother gets old after a while. I needed some new butts to kick. 3:50 p.m. King_Explosion. Wheeze. 3:50 p.m. King_Explosion. I'm telling her that at dinner tonight. Bush_Boss. Okay, but can we get back to the part where my mother is in a Discord server with me? 3:51 p.m. Bush_Queen. Oh, lighten up, sweetie. Besides, I'm only fine with vulgar language so long as it's not within hearing range. 3:52 p.m. Bush_Queen. That said, at Insomnicat please keep the swearing to a minimum in the voice chat. Insomnicat. Yes, ma'am. 3:53 p.m. Hitoshi snorted as Bush_Boss kept panicking about his mom being in the Discord server. At least he has a mom that loves him. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the ground floor. Oi, freak, get your ass down here and help unload the groceries. Hitoshi quietly groaned to himself, before knocking on the floor of his room once. This family had told him that they used a code 1 knock for yes, 2 for no. Of course, Hitoshi knew that was bullshit. The only time anyone ever knocked on anything in the house was when he was responding to someone. Just a precaution against his quirk, like with the last few families. He quickly closed down his laptop and hid it between his mattress and bed frame. The device was one of the few things he carried with him between homes, the other 3 being his phone, his backpack of essentials, and the muzzle. Hitoshi had managed to buy the laptop for a decent price a couple homes back, and always hid it somewhere in his room, to make sure the other kids didn't steal or break it. His backpack was similarly hidden in one of the drawers of his dresser, and his phone stayed underneath a loose floorboard whenever he had to leave it behind. And that damn muzzle always sat in plain sight. As he descended the ladder to the attic, he found himself thinking about the background chatter he could always hear through Bush_Boss's microphone while the other boy was in the voice chat. He wished he could live in a home like that. Kyuka hummed to herself as she put her stuff away, before pulling her laptop out of her bag and booting up Discord, quickly scanning through the conversation that was going on in the general chat. She snorted at Bush_Boss panicking over his mom being in the server with him. Dad shouted, Oi, Kyuka, you better not be gaming before you finish your homework. She called back, I know, Dad. Don't worry. I'm not dumb enough to put gaming before my studies. Rockin'. That's my girl. She chuckled to herself, before pulling her homework out of her backpack and setting it on her desk in front of her laptop. She reached over to the jar on the side of her desk and pulled out a pencil, checking to make sure it was sharp before turning her attention to the papers in front of her. Chapter 4. Izuku looked up at the seemingly massive door in front of him and took a deep breath. Katsuki scoffed from behind him. Relax, nerd. It's just the second year of junior high. Izuku glared at him. Rational brain knows that. Anxiety brain is still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Katsuki held his hands up in surrender. Okay, I get it. But standing here waiting for you to get your nerves under control isn't gonna help anything. Izuku sighed, before shouldering his backpack and sliding the door open. Immediately, all attention turned to the doorway, and Izuku swallowed, feeling a bead of sweat run down the back of his neck. The teacher said, Midoriya-kun, Bakugo-kun. I was expecting you here earlier. Please, find your seats. They obliged, moving to the 2 empty seats by the outside wall. Katsuki took the desk at the very front, and Izuku took the one behind the blonde. The girl on his right glanced over at him, twirling something around her finger. Hey, Jiraiya Kyuka. And you are? Midoriya Izuku. She raised an eyebrow. Wait a sec. I swear I recognize your voice from somewhere. Bush boss. Izuku brightened. You must be totally jacked. Nice to finally meet you in person. The teacher cleared her throat, and Izuku snapped his mouth shut, turning to face the front. She announced, Now, most of you probably recognize each other from last year. However, this year we have 2 students transferring here from online schooling. The circumstances are their own business, and I will not tolerate any of you bothering them about it. Am I understood? They chorused their assent, and she nodded, before turning around and writing something on the board. As most of you may know, my name is Chishiki Yonda. I'll be your homeroom teacher this year and next year, since your previous teacher chose to retire. As some of you may have heard from your upperclassmen, I do not tolerate troublemakers in my class. If I find anyone causing issues for other people in this school, then rest assured that they will be properly dealt with. Don't feel like you have to take matters into your own hands. It's my job to ensure that you all have a safe learning environment. Izuku chuckled to himself. Certainly better than the shitstains that Aldera would hire. They always went on about leading us to greatness and all that crap. Fat lot of good that did them. Chishiki-sensei glanced over at the clock and sighed. Normally, I'd have everyone come up and say a little something about themselves, but we're low on time for homeroom, so I'll see you all this afternoon. Please try to not destroy the classroom while I'm not here. She turned and walked out the door, shutting it behind her right as the bell rang. Immediately, the class got up and started filtering out of the door, and Izuku stood up and shouldered his bag. Jiraiya tapped him on the shoulder, and he turned to face her. I looked at the locker assignments and noticed that you and Bakugo, I think his name is, have lockers right next to mine. Come on. I'll show you where to find him. As it turned out, Mizutafu Junior High had a similar locker system to Aldera Junior High, where the lockers for students were placed outside of their assigned homeroom. As a result, it was a short walk to Jiraiya's locker, where she pointed out that Izuku's was on the left of hers and Katsuki's was on the right. As Izuku loaded his books into his locker, Katsuki leaned against the wall. So, totally jacked, right? Jiraiya nodded. Yep. If Midoriya here is Bush Boss, that must make you King Explosion. Katsuki grinned. Exactly. Looks like your username is on the nose. Those jacks just for show? Or can they actually do shit? One of the things dangling from her ears that Izuku had assumed was an earring suddenly wiggled, and his eyes widened as he realized they were actually earphone jacks hanging from her earlobes. That's so cool. Can you plug them into electronics like earbuds? How strong are the tips? How much weight can you lift with them? Can they extend? Do they do anything else? Jiraiya blinked, before rubbing at her chin. Yes, strong enough to insert into concrete walls about half a pound each, up to maybe 2 meters, and they can project my heartbeat about 1,000 times louder when I plug them into some kind of speaker. Katsuki let out a low whistle. Damn, that's a pretty cool quirk. Jiraiya rubbed at the back of her neck as a slight blush formed on her cheeks. You really think so? You don't think they're creepy? Izuku's eyes narrowed. I want names. Suddenly, a loud shriek drew their attention. A purple creature with glowing yellow eyes had its arms wrapped protectively around a student with a black bird head. Don't touch Fumi. An upperclassman standing in front of the student cackled, flanked by 2 other upperclassmen. You can't tell me what to do, Birdie. I'll touch whatever I want to touch. Jiraiya sighed. Samui Tamaru. He thinks he's some big shot because his dad's the principal. Unfortunately, that does make him a big shot. And his dad's got really good lawyers. So any attempts to take him down haven't worked yet. Izuku frowned. What about Shishiki-sensei? Jiraiya shook her head. She tries, but Samui's sadly not an idiot. He never acts up whenever she's around, so she never catches him in the act. An uncharacteristically smart move on his part, since she has Nedzu on speed dial. Katsuki did a double take. Hold the fuck up. Our homeroom teacher has the goddamn principal of UA on speed dial. Jiraiya nodded. Yeah, supposedly, she was one of his personal students back when she was in the Gen Ed course. I think she caught his attention with her quirk. It lets her read entire books just by touching the cover. Izuku's eyes widened, but another hiss from the creature down the hallway grabbed his attention. Do you know that student with the bird head? Jairu hummed. Not personally. That's Tokoyami Fumikage. He kinda keeps to himself, so nobody really knows anything about him. All I've heard is that his quirk is supposedly really strong. Izuku hummed. Suddenly, the other end of the hallway turned bright, and the purple creature whimpered and retreated under the shirt of the student with the bird head. One of Samui's lackeys stepped forward, his palm glowing. We figured out your quirk's weakness, bird boy. That monster doesn't like light, does it? Jairu grunted. Akurui Tenohira, half of Samui's posse. He claims to be Samui's friend, but he's really just riding Samui's coattails. Katsuki huffed. That's painfully familiar. The other upperclassman held his hand out, palm up. A gray glow encompassed the end of the hallway, and Jairu winced. Crap, that's Shizukana Hanai. He just silenced that entire area. Even if Tokoyami calls for help, nobody's gonna hear it. Izuku scowled. Reaching into his locker, he pulled out a button camera and attached it to his collar, flicking it on and walking forward. Katsuki with me. Katsuki nodded, falling into step behind Izuku. The two of them strode forward, the crowd parting before him. As they entered the cutoff area, Samui's voice came into painful clarity. Now, if you promise to do my homework for this semester, then maybe I won't cut the blood flow to your legs, chicken brain. Izuku cleared his throat, drawing the attention of all four students. Excuse me, I couldn't help but notice that this isn't exactly the most friendly of chats. Perhaps one of you could explain to me what the hell is going on here. Samui drew himself up and walked forward, clearly trying to intimidate Izuku with his sheer height. Buzz off, pipsqueak. We were just teaching this villain that the only way he'll stay out of the slammer is if he behaves like a good boy and doesn't piss off the only future hero in this joint. Izuku snorted. Only future hero? Good one. Samui huffed. I wasn't joking. You'd better not try anything, runt. Izuku smiled, but it lacked any trace of mirth. Why, that threat almost makes you sound like a bully. And surely a bully wouldn't go on to become a hero, right? Akurui stepped forward and grabbed Izuku's face. Shut up and back off, unless you want to go blind for a week. Katsuki's hand clamped down on Akurui's wrist. Hands off, fuckface. Akurui's hand was wrenched from Izuku's face, and the upperclassman actually stumbled back a few paces. Samui's eyes narrowed. And who the hell do you think you are? Katsuki stood upright and thumped a fist against his chest. Bakugo Katsuki, future UA Hero Course student. Izuku smirked. Midoriya Izuku, future UA Hero Course student. Samui scoffed. Like hell you are. My dad's the principal, you know. You realize how easily he could fuck up your school records? You'll never get into a hero course in Japan, unless you apologize and back the fuck off right now. Izuku's smile didn't budge. Sorry, but I'm afraid I can't do that. You see, I make it a habit to never apologize for doing the right thing. Samui clicked his tongue. Shame. You could have avoided having your lives ruined if you just used your brains. Shizukana snapped his fingers, and the gray tint faded from the area. The three upperclassmen walked by, and Samui intentionally shoved Izuku to the side as he passed. Dad's not going to be happy when he hears about how his son was beaten up by 2 second-years. Izuku looked Samui in the eyes. Go cry to your daddy. It won't help. Samui scoffed and turned his back on them. Once the three upperclassmen rounded the corner, Izuku turned around and walked forward, offering a hand out to Tokoyami. You all right there? The other boy huffed. I am fine. Dark Shadow will recover. But that was quite foolish of you. Samui has brought darkness upon many other students at this school. He will no doubt do the same to you. Izuku grinned and reached up to his collar, flicking the button camera off. From what I figured, he's only gotten away with it before because there wasn't any evidence against him. Trust me, if there's one thing I hate above all else, it's bullies. Inko frowned as she walked through the halls of Mizutafu Junior High, soon finding her way to the principal's office. The secretary looked up at her. Midoriya Inko, yes? Principal Samui has been expecting you. Please go in. Inko didn't respond, instead pulling the door open and taking in the expressions of everyone inside. The anger on the principal's face, the smug grins of both Izuku and an upperclassman, and Katsuki's scowl. Then she noticed the bruises covering the upperclassman's face. She sighed. All right, what happened? The principal shouted. Your son attacked my boy right after homeroom, jumping on him and beating him mercilessly for no reason. Inko hummed, scanning the older boy's face. Would you sit down for a moment? The upperclassman's expression turned confused, but he complied, sitting down in a nearby chair. Izuku, would you please hold your hand up to the bruise on his cheek? Izuku complied with a grin, and the principal froze at the clear size discrepancy. Teach that proves nothing. Bruises grow in size as they get older. Everybody knows that. Inko tilted her head. True. Do you have camera footage of my son beating up your son? The principal scowled. Irrelevant. Your brat attacked my son unprovoked. This will have to go on his permanent record. Inko smiled sweetly, but her eyes held a burning fire. My dear principal, how could we know who deserves to be punished without footage of the incident? The principal pointed at the upperclassman frantically. It's clear as day. My son has bruises, yours does not. There is no need for footage. Izuku cleared his throat. Actually, if we're going to discuss footage, there's something you should see. He pulled out a hologram projector and set it on the principal's desk, before taking a USB out of his pocket and inserting it into the projector. The device turned on, showing footage that looked to be taken from Izuku's button camera. The principal went pale as his son threatened a different student, before turning on Izuku and attempting to intimidate him into silence, then turning to more threats when intimidation failed. Throughout the entire recording, Izuku had not moved once, nor laid a hand on the older boy. As the upperclassman in the footage rounded the corner, the video ended, and Izuku slipped the projector back into his pocket. Any further questions, sir? The principal scoffed. You probably just went and beat him up after turning off the camera, probably trying to intimidate my poor son into silence, so that he wouldn't turn you in like you deserve to be. There was a knock on the door to the office, and he shouted, "What?" A female voice that wasn't the secretary said, "I have something that you'll be very interested in, sir. It's about this whole affair." The principal huffed. "Very well, come in." The door swung open, and the upperclassman paled at the sight of an old friend Inko hadn't seen in a while. She stayed quiet as Yonda walked in with a USB thumb drive held in her hand. After hearing about the incident from one of my students who witnessed the whole thing, I decided to grab the security footage of the hallway where this took place. Izuku held out his hologram projector with his own USB unplugged, and Yonda took it gracefully, inserting her flash drive into it and setting it on the desk. Immediately, a video played that told the same story as what had been displayed on Izuku's button camera. Yonda pointed out the gray tint at the edges of the screen. As I'm sure you're aware, sir, this tint indicates the effects of the quirk of Shizukana Hanai, who is visible in this footage. Fortunately, this camera happened to be inside his range of effect, allowing it to capture audio from the incident as well as video. You can also clearly see quirk usage by Akarui Tenohira, and your son clearly made threats of using his quirk on Tokoyami Fumikage. The principal blustered. But the Tokoyami boy also used his quirk. Inko cleared her throat. Actually, young Tokoyami appears to possess a sentient quirk, meaning he cannot use it in the same way as young Shizukana or young Akarui. Besides, quirk usage is not illegal if it is in self-defense. The principal went pale. Inko smiled and walked forward, steepling her fingers on the man's desk. Why, it seems to me as though you were trying to portray this as an attack on your son, when your son was one of the aggressors in this instance. But the bruises. Yonda cleared her throat and tapped on the projector. Actually, I took the liberty of looking through the rest of the day's footage earlier. The video shifted, now displaying footage of the upperclassman punching himself in the face, right where the bruise currently was. He was laughing alongside his two lackeys as he said, "Let's see that little punk try and spin that on me." The projector shut off, and the older boy paled as Yonda lifted it off the desk and unplugged her USB, handing the projector back to Izuku and crossing her arms as she stared down at the squirming principal. "The way I see it, you have two options. Either you agree to punish your son fairly from here on out, or I send this footage to Principal Nedzu. It's entirely up to you." Izuku grinned as they walked out of the principal's office. "Thanks for the help, Chishiki-sensei." She waved her hand dismissively. Think nothing of it. I've been waiting to catch Tamaru in the act ever since I first got a complaint about him from one of my students." After a few seconds, she broke down into giggles. Though, it took all my willpower not to react when I walked into that scum's office and saw Inko of all people standing there. Mom started giggling, and Izuku glanced back and forth at the two of them. "You two know each other?" Mom nodded. "Yonda and I were in the same Gen Ed course at UA. Actually, so was Mitsuki." Chishiki-sensei gasped. "Oh my god. I can't believe I forgot to keep in contact with Mitsuki. Oh man, she's gonna kill me. Wait a minute. Her brat is in my homeroom." Izuku snorted. "Hey, give Katsuki a little slack. He does have Uncle Masaru to balance out Aunt Mitsuki." Chapter 5. As it turned out, Principal Samui had decided not to punish his son as he should have, and instead tried to call the cops on Chishiki-sensei for threats and blackmail. Unfortunately, said cops included a detective with a lie detector quirk who slapped a pair of handcuffs on the sorry excuse for a man the second that he stopped shouting. With the former principal now in jail, somebody had to step up and fill the role, and the current vice principal had resigned after learning that his old boss had ruined several promising students' careers before they could begin. As a result, Chishiki-sensei ended up taking on the job of principal, though still managing to act as the homeroom teacher for Izuku's class because, in her words, "I trust my new vice principal to handle the administration while I'm teaching." Of course, finding out that said new vice principal was mom was a pretty big shock. Tokoyami ended up joining the friend group once Tamaru was expelled. Not because he was scared of facing Chishiki-sensei's wrath, like most students that tried to be friends with Izuku, but because he genuinely appreciated Izuku sticking up for him when nobody else in that hallway would. Though, Izuku only found out when Dark Shadow appeared out of nowhere and quietly informed him of the fact, since Tokoyami was entirely committed to the edgelord aesthetic. Naturally, with the in-person meeting with Totally_Jacked came the long-promised visit to her parents' music shop. Jairu had a full face blush when she opened the store that Saturday to Izuku's grinning face and Katsuki's signature lazy smirk. Her parents were initially somewhat standoffish, up until Izuku brought up the fact that he'd gotten Tamaru expelled. He'd learned that the upperclassmen and his lackeys were the ones who primarily gave Jiru grief over her quirk. At that point, the mother profusely thanked him while the father burst into tears and threw himself into a Dejiza position. After the first meeting, Izuku and Katsuki would often come to the jacked-up music center on the weekends. Katsuki found that he had a talent with percussion, and Izuku found himself really enjoying bass guitar. As with most things, Mom ended up tagging along at one point, and it turned out that she used to play guitar back in high school. Izuku nearly had a heart attack when Mom showed him a picture of her wearing a flame-patterned guitar and a black biker jacket alongside Aunt Mitsuki, who was wearing a flame-patterned guitar and a similar jacket. Hitoshi sighed as his former foster mom slammed the door shut, leaving him standing on the street with nothing but his backpack, his clothes, his laptop, and his phone. The door opened again, but Hitoshi didn't move, just bringing his arm up to catch the muzzle thrown at his face. He looked down at it before sighing again and stuffing it in his pocket, then turning on his heel and walking off in the direction of the orphanage. Well, it was nice while it lasted. At least it was better than the last house. When the orphanage came into view around the corner, Hitoshi raised an eyebrow at the sight of 2 police cruisers parked in front of it, along with a nondescript black car parked off to the side. That's new. Wonder who called the cops. As he got closer, he felt something in his chest flutter as the bitch who ran the place was dragged out in handcuffs, squirming in the grip of a police officer with a cat head. You don't understand. Those brats would have nowhere to go but villainy if I wasn't there to correct them. She glanced over and saw him standing there. There's one of them. That one's nothing but a filthy brainwasher. Arrest him, not me. The officer just rolled his eyes and unceremoniously shoved the bitch into the backseat of his cruiser, before pulling out a radio. Hitoshi didn't bother listening to what the cop was saying as he walked into the building, watching with awe as the various restraints were picked up by police officers and deposited into evidence bags. Hitoshi noticed a guy standing by, wearing a long trench coat and a fedora. Hey, you're the detective running this bust, right? The man nodded. Tsukachi Neo Mesa, Mizudafu Police Department. How can I help you? Hitoshi pulled the muzzle out of his pocket and held it out to the guy. Figured you'd want another nail in her coffin. The detective looked down at the muzzle and winced, before pulling out a handheld radio. Yamada-san, I might have someone for you to take a look at. The woman running this place was sending him to foster homes with a muzzle. The man suddenly held the radio far away from his ear, and Hitoshi could understand, considering the demonic screech on the other end. Once it was cut off, the detective put the radio back up to his ear. Aizawa-san? Yes, Yamada heard me correctly. A muzzle. No, the kid's still here. I'm actually impressed that he's sticking around after he heard that screech. I'll see the 2 of you in a minute. Hitoshi raised an eyebrow. Friends of yours? The detective nodded. A couple of pro-heroes. I work with Aizawa-san a lot for cases like this, and Yamada-san often gets dragged into them by virtue of proximity. Hitoshi sighed. Well, if this Yamada guy reacts like that whenever he hears about muzzles, I guess I can't be too mad. Detective Tsukachi winced. Yeah, he's a little touchy on the subject. Hits a little too close to home, if you know what I mean. Hitoshi nodded, and the sound of a door opening drew his attention. Suddenly, a yellow blur shot out from the stairs to the correction facility, aka the torture chamber in the basement, and Hitoshi was suddenly in a very tight embrace. Oh, you poor baby. Hitoshi's brain paused as he recognized the banana-shaped hairdo of the guy holding him. Holy shit, Present Mike used to be muzzled? A sigh from the doorway drew his attention, and he froze completely. A disheveled man wearing a black jumpsuit walked out from the basement and over to Detective Tsukachi, running a hand through his unkempt hair. I'm assuming that's the kid you were talking about? The detective nodded and passed the other man the muzzle. He had this in his pocket, and he matches the description she gave of the tired brat with purple hair. The man glanced over and frowned at Hitoshi's shocked expression. Mike, let him go. I think you might have cracked his ribs or something. Present Mike immediately released him. Oh, so sorry, little listener. Are you okay? Hitoshi didn't move an inch. Listener? Eraserhead? The underground hero smacked his palm into his forehead. Damn it. I told Momoto not to share those videos of me on patrol. Now I've apparently got a fanbase. Fucking wonderful. Mike, go ahead and kill me now. Present Mike snorted and clapped the older hero on the back. Hey, lighten up. At least your new kid's a fan, right? Hitoshi's brain froze again. New kid. Eraserhead sighed and dragged a hand down his face. Apparently, when this idiot heard about this place, he got it in his head that we needed to adopt all of the kids here. I managed to talk him down to the worst one, which the bitch running the place claimed was you. So, if you're okay with it, we thought we'd adopt you. Is that fine with you? Something in Hitoshi's chest swelled. No more muzzles? No more muzzles. No more being kicked out every other week? Nope. No more being silent 24/7? Something in Eraserhead's expression softened, and he nodded. No more being the villain kid. Just a kid. Hitoshi sniffed. Please. Izuku glanced down at his phone, frowning. That's weird. Insomnicat usually doesn't do mass pings. Wonder what's up with him. He quickly opened Discord, navigating from last night's discussion with Newton Espagne about 13's Quirk to the general chat. His eyes widened, and he tapped Katsuki's shoulder. The blonde raised an eyebrow at him in confusion, and Izuku pointed at his phone screen. #General. Insomnicat at everyone 3:04 p.m. Insomnicat, guys. Insomnicat, bros. Insomnicat, my GS. Insomnicat. Eraserhead and Present Mike just shut down my shitty orphanage and adopted me 3:05 p.m. Several people are typing. Kyuka glanced down at her phone, eyes widening when she read the notifications. She dropped the guitar she was holding, and it crashed into the floor, snapping the neck on impact. Dad appeared in the doorway and shouted, "Kyuka, I thought you knew better than that." "Dad, Insomnicat's orphanage got shut down." Dad froze, his neck scolding stuck in his throat. After a few seconds, he turned and started heading towards the living room. Honey? Remember how we gave the Midoriyas our address? I think we should be prepared for guests soon." May hummed as she fiddled with the screws on her latest project, just barely noticing the first ding from her phone. As usual, she dismissed it as background noise, but the 4 dings that followed in short order grabbed her attention. She quickly pulled off her goggles and grabbed her phone, unlocking it and scanning the conversation. Her other hand froze, and her baby exploded, but she didn't move an inch, not even when the workshop's sprinkler system activated and started spraying down the fire that had formed under her screwdriver. Mom poked her head in and sighed. "Really, Mayday? The last one was only an hour ago." Mom? One of my Discord pals just got his orphanage shut down. Apparently the owner was treating all of the kids like villains. He just sent an image of the torture chamber in the basement." Mom froze, before shutting her mouth and turning on her heel. "I'll go bake some muffins, then. Caramel sound okay?" May nodded wordlessly, bringing her knuckles to her mouth as she watched the new messages pile up. Danky glanced over as his phone dinged with a news notification. "Huh? Saitama Orphanage closes down over abusive activity? Yikes, that's gotta suck for the kids there." Suddenly, he noticed the several Discord notifications. "Wait, Insomnicat's orphanage got closed down? Wow, that's a weird coincidence. What are the odds that 2 orphanages get closed down on the same day?" Then he noticed one of the images that Insomnicat had provided of the outside of his former orphanage. "Wait, it's the same orphanage? Wait, Insomnicat was in Saitama the entire time. We totally could have met up. Wait, shit, his orphanage just closed down. He's gotta be feeling awful after that. Wait, he got adopted by Present Mike. #General. Insomnicat. Okay, so, quick update on the whole getting adopted situation. The detective who was running the orphanage raid is a work friend of Eraserhead. So the adoption paperwork got filled out in like half an hour and I'm already at their house. 3:48 p.m. Insomnicat. I'd send photos, but Dad, Eraserhead, doesn't like the idea of having images of his house shared online. Job security and all that. Insomnicat. I mean, I totally get why, but still. Wish you guys could see this place. 3:49 p.m. Insomnicat. OH my god. Bush_boss. Cat? You okay? 3:49 p.m. #Kitty Corner. Insomnicat. Look at this baby. Attached. 2 images. 3:50 p.m. Sparky_. Oh my god. That's adorable. Name? 3:50 p.m. Insomnicat. Dad says her name is Tortellini. I would die for her. 3:51 p.m. Sparky_. Oh, dude. Same. 3:51 p.m. Bush_boss. That's a very cute kitty. I believe that breed is a tortoiseshell. 3:51 p.m. Insomnicat. I don't care what breed she is. All I know is that I would die for her. 3:52 p.m. Insomnicat. Wait, Dad says there are 3 more. Totally _jacked. Welp. We just lost at Insomnicat to the furry demons. I'll expect an update in a few hours with pictures once he's pulled away from them by his new parents. 3:54 p.m. Insomnicat. Bold of you to assume I would allow myself to be pulled away from kitties. 3:55 p.m. Insomnicat. And that Dad wouldn't be in the same position. Insomnicat. According to Pops, Present Mike, Dad's apparently also a sucker for cats. He found Tortellini in an alley on patrol and immediately took her home with him. 3:56 p.m. Insomnicat. Oh dear God, he showed me a picture. Insomnicat. My heart is now melted. Shoyuta huffed warmly as the kid tapped away at his phone, likely chatting with his online buddies. Turning, he grabbed Hizashi's arm and dragged his husband into the kitchen, leaving their new kid in the living room. What's up, Sho? Shoyuta sighed and pushed Hizashi towards the fridge, before leaning back against the edge of the sink. You do realize we're gonna have to rearrange our patrol schedules, so we aren't leaving him at home alone, right? Hizashi raised an eyebrow. What? You don't trust him to be able to take care of himself? Shoyuta shook his head. No, it's not that. I know he can take care of himself, but he shouldn't have to. I want to show him that we're not gonna leave him on his own like the adults in his life clearly have so far. Hizashi winced. Fair point. I'll call the agency and let them know I won't be able to take on nighttime patrols for the foreseeable future. That way you don't have to ruin what's left of your sleep schedule. Alright? Shoyuta sighed. I guess. We can move things around as necessary as we get used to having the kid around. Not just scheduling-wise, but furniture-wise too. Hisashi snapped his fingers. I knew I was forgetting something. We haven't stocked the little listener's room with furniture yet. How about I take him shopping tomorrow, since I'm already scheduled to be off then? Shoyuta nodded. That should work. He glanced over the counter separating the kitchen and the dining room, and something in his chest grew warm when Hitoshi laughed at something one of his friends had said. We're really lucky, aren't we? Hisashi raised an eyebrow and smirked. In what way? Mainly that his spirit wasn't shattered by that hellhole disguised as an orphanage. I'm honestly impressed he's still able to smile and laugh like that after enduring so much pain. Hisashi patted him on the shoulder. I think it's safe to assume that his online buddies played a big part in that. Having friends is a hell of a thing, you know, no matter how much you undergrounders like to preach about it being an occupational hazard. Shoyuta snorted. I dare you to say that to Emi's face. Wasn't she going nuts the other day about how she and Ragdoll had started a thing? Hisashi chuckled. You know damn well what I mean, Sho. 2 weeks later, Ochako opened the door, raising an eyebrow at her parents sitting at the dining room table and staring wide-eyed at a letter. Ma? Pa? What's going on? Ma glanced up, tears running down her face. Chaco, we got a request from the Put Your Hands Up agency. Ochako did a double take. Wait, we got hired by President Mike? What's he want us for? Pa tapped the letter with the back of his hand. Says he's thinking of remodeling his agency to include overnight rooms and training gyms. And he heard through the grapevine that we specialize in larger buildings. He'd also heard that we'd been cheated by our most recent client. And he says he wants to help us out. Ochako's mind flashed back to the conversation she'd read on the Hero Hopeful server about Insomnicat getting adopted by Eraserhead and President Mike. Insomnicat, you sly devil you. Ma tilted her head in confusion. Eh? Ochako waved a hand dismissively. I'll tell you later over dinner. Still gotta get my homework done. Izuku smiled as he scanned through the back and forth of gratitude and polite dismissals between Newton Espain and Insomnicat, before turning his phone off and setting it on the table by the couch. Turning his attention back to the TV, he picked up his controller and unpaused the game. Alright, let's see what you've got, Morpho Knight. And that's a wrap on part 1. I hope you're all just as excited as I am. If you haven't seen the previous parts yet, don't miss out. Check out the full playlist to catch up on everything you've missed. Big shout out to the amazing author behind this work. Make sure to show some love and support for their incredible effort and creativity. I'll be back before you know it with more content. Thank you all so much for your continued support. You're the reason I do this, and I can't wait to share more with you soon.